Although Pangea gets the most publicity, it's not the only supercontinent that's ever formed on Earth. There have been several supercontinents that have formed throughout Earth's history, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about all of the supercontinents or proposed supercontinents that have formed throughout Earth's history, as well as 5 times that supercontinents have led to major diversification and devastation of life on Earth. So let's get started. First, let's start with some background information, like what is a supercontinent? What actually defines a supercontinent? Well, it's just a large landmass made of multiple continents that have joined together. They join together through plate tectonics, essentially the subduction of ocean crust between continental crust landmasses. In other words, in plate tectonics, as I've discussed in many videos, there's a process called subduction in which oceanic crust becomes subducted or goes underneath continental crust because oceanic crust is more dense than continental crust because of their compositions. And when an entire ocean basin of oceanic crust gets subducted underneath a continental crust landmass, that will close the ocean basin, leading to the joining of the continental landmass that the ocean crust is subducting underneath, as well as the continental crust that bookends the other side of that ocean basin. So they meet and they essentially join together in a big mountain-forming event, which we call an orogeny. This is how the Himalayas formed, for example, and when India, which was kind of a floating continental landmass, not floating, but you know what I mean, it wasn't connected yet to Eurasia, when it collided, it formed the Himalayas and it closed an ocean basin that was in between them. So ocean basins can close, and this is how continents meet. And when they all meet together and form one big continental landmass on Earth, we call this a supercontinent. However, some proposed supercontinents, like Valbara, I've heard this pronounced multiple ways, so correct me if I'm wrong, and Kinderland, are all examples of supercontinents that have been proposed to have formed before plate tectonics was a thing. So how did these form before plate tectonics? Essentially, some of these really early ones, rather than representing continental landmasses that have come together, they kind of just represent all of the continental landmass that has formed so far on Earth. And therefore, it's a supercontinent because there's just one continent. But just because one continent has formed, it doesn't mean it's smashed together with other continents to form a supercontinent, if you understand what I mean. I should probably back up and say continental crust formed after an initial oceanic crust and ocean formed on Earth, and it began to separate out of that crust due to partial melting in the mantle and volcanism and whatnot, things that I talk about in other videos that I won't get into here. But essentially, continental crust formed later, and because of this, these early so-called supercontinents that formed pre-plate tectonics are, in some cases, just representative of the small amount of continental crust that have formed by then, and therefore, do we call it a supercontinent? Do we not? However, some of these did result from land masses coming together to form a supercontinent. However, not necessarily by way of plate tectonics. I just recently came out with a video about the difference between tectonics and plate tectonics, and that not all tectonics is plate tectonics, and how early Earth operated tectonically by different means than with rigid plates that undergo subduction and whatnot. So go see that video for more on that. All this is to say, for this video's purposes, that these early proposed supercontinents are relatively controversial in their classification as a supercontinent and how they formed to become a supercontinent. Even up till after plate tectonics was a thing, post 2.5 billion years ago, the supercontinent Columbia or Nuna is also another relatively controversial one. Just in that its configuration was really a supercontinent or not. Even the more recent ones, there's slightly different proposed configurations of what that supercontinent would have looked like based on the data that we have available. So just take it with a grain of salt is all I'm saying. And with these really old supercontinents, it's also very hard to tell how they would have affected climate, life, etc. There's hypotheses, but it's still a work in progress, so more research is needed. And with that, I want to make 2 points. One is, if this interests you, if this field of research interests you, I highly encourage you to go into this research. It has a lot of implications for, okay, well, how was life evolving? How did these continental positions affect climate? How might that affect climate and life and biological evolution in the future? And so there's a lot of practical applications that many don't think about right away. But anyway, go into this research is point number one. Point number two is that because these early supercontinents have so many uncertainties surrounding them, we will be focusing today on the supercontinents that are a little bit younger. The first of which is Rodinia. Rodinia formed around 1.1 to, I see estimates up to 1.3 billion years ago, and lasted until about 800 million years ago when it began to break up. After Rodinia's breakup, the continents reconfigured into the next supercontinent called Pangea, which was a relatively short-lived supercontinent that, to my understanding, has some controversy surrounding it because some evidence suggests that its breakup coincided with its formation, and thus it wouldn't have been a true supercontinent. In other words, if you picture all of the continents coming together, that wouldn't happen simultaneously for every continental landmass. So in the case of Pangea, it seems as though that some of the continental landmasses came together, and then as the others began coming together, those initial ones that had come together started to break apart, and thus the timing in which all the continental landmasses were together might not have been the same time, and therefore might not have been an actual supercontinent. In any case, after Pangea broke apart, it formed the supercontinent Gondwana, which lasted a pretty long time, all the way until 300-ish million years ago when Pangea began to form, and we'll get to that. But one thing you might notice about Gondwana as a supercontinent is that there's other continental landmasses up in the northern hemisphere not connected to Gondwana. While the northern hemisphere was occupied by Laurentia, which was a landmass that now makes up the Craton or main part of North America, and then Baltica and Siberia, these landmasses over here, as well as Avalonia, which eventually connected with Laurentia as well as Baltica to form Euramerica, Europe and America, which then split apart into Europe and America. But anyway, all of these northern landmasses were not connected to Gondwana. However, that doesn't necessarily take away from its supercontinent status. This is another stipulation when it comes to classification as a supercontinent. I've seen it defined differently depending on where you look, as in all of the continental landmasses together in one, or many of them together in one. In any case, most sources I find do define Gondwana as a supercontinent in that it was many continental landmasses joined together into one, even though it wasn't all of them. And like I mentioned, Gondwana lasted throughout most of the Paleozoic era, even though it, moved around because of plate tectonics. It didn't necessarily separate until about 300 million years ago, when it still didn't separate. However, it did combine with those northern hemisphere continental landmasses that we just talked about to form Pangea, everybody's favorite supercontinent because they know what it is. Pangea is not only the most famous, but also most recent supercontinent, which lasted from its initial beginning of formation around 300 million years ago until around 200 million years ago in the late Triassic, when it began to break up. And by, 150 million years ago in the Jurassic, we can see here that it began to break up through the formation of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which eventually formed the Atlantic Ocean. But now to the part of this video that I find most exciting, and that is, how have these supercontinents affected climate and life? In terms of life, the assembly of supercontinents has often led to increased biodiversity as it has opened new habitats for life. Oftentimes, continents will connect and there'll be a great migration and kind of interchanging, and this opens a lot of new environments for life that was previously not able to get to that other continent. But the breakup of supercontinents also has often led to increased biodiversity through increased speciation, or the formation of new species, because it isolates populations of species from one another. So now we'll get into the 5 major examples of times that supercontinents have greatly affected life. The first one is when the breakup of Rodinia led to Snowball Earth, the global glaciation of Earth, as well as the evolution of the first animals. How Gondwana migration, so the migration of the Gondwana supercontinent, led to the Ordovician mass extinction around 445 million years ago. How the formation of Pangea around 250 million years ago led to the Permian mass extinction, which is the largest mass extinction of the last 500 million years. How the breakup of Pangea led to the Triassic mass extinction, another massive mass extinction of the last 500 million years, and how the breakup of Pangea also, in the long term, led to a lot of speciation and diversification of both dinosaur and eventually mammal life. So first, how Rodinia breakup led to Snowball Earth and the first animals. The breakup of Rodinia, which was occurring around 750 million years ago, greatly increased continental weathering, the weathering of continental rocks. And as I've talked about in many videos, we know that continental weathering increases carbon burial. In other words, the weathering of rocks at Earth's surface and their transport of the rocks and their constituent ions in water to the ocean leads to the formation, or kind of induces the formation, of carbon-containing rocks in the ocean, specifically calcium carbonates and limestones. And because this process sequesters carbon from the atmosphere, stores it in the rocks long term, this leads to cooling because it lowers the greenhouse effect. And this led to the Cryogenian Ice Age event. In other words, Snowball Earth, around 700 million years ago. And it's thought that this Snowball Earth event may have led to the evolution of the first multicellular animal ecosystems on Earth. That is, the Ediacaran biota, which evolved around 635 million years ago, and then the Cambrian explosion right after that, around 540 million years ago. And you might be thinking, wait, a near global glaciation helped rather than hurt life? Well, it did likely cause a mass extinction event during the glaciation, which I talk about how and why that would have happened and how we try to quantify that without much of a fossil record at the time in this video here, which I'll link up to the top right. But I also have a video where I discuss how Snowball Earth, although devastating to life at the time, might have triggered the evolution of multicellular animals, or at least gave multicellular animals a leg up in terms of surviving Snowball Earth, so that after Snowball Earth, they were the ones to diversify and form these major animal ecosystems, which obviously coincided with the end of Snowball Earth, and that is one of the reasons we have these hypotheses. I will link up that other video to the top right here, the one where I talk about how Snowball Earth might have induced multicellular animal evolution. In any case, when we're talking about tectonic-driven events like Snowball Earth and animal evolution driven by the breakup of Rodinia, it is important to note that there are other factors that were involved, not just the breakup of Rodinia. For example, there was also the spread of new algal species and other photosynthesizing organisms at the time, which were also sequestering a lot of carbon from the atmosphere, contributing to the rapid cooling event that led to Snowball Earth. Second, we have the Gondwana migration and the Ordovician mass extinction event. This one's pretty simple. The movement of Gondwana over the South Pole around 450 million years ago contributed to increased glaciation in the late Ordovician period, because when you have continental landmasses at the poles, it's easier for ice to form there. This, along with the spread of non-vascular plants over land at the time, things like mosses, led to rapid global cooling and glaciation at the time, because the spread of plants onto land, which land plants weren't a thing before, was sequestering more carbon from the atmosphere, and the formation of ice at the South Pole was leading to an increased albedo effect. In other words, the reflection of more sunlight off of Earth's surface, leading to cooler climates. And as we know, rapid and global change of any kind, cooling or warming, leads to mass extinctions if Earth's history has any say about it. And this rapid and global cooling event, as well as a pulse of rapid global warming right after, caused the end Ordovician mass extinction event around 440 million years ago, which wiped out around 86% of all species. I have a video about the Ordovician mass extinction event. If you want to check it out, I will link it to the top right here. Now moving to number 3, we have the formation of Pangea, which contributed to causing the largest mass extinction event of the last 550 million years. That is the end Permian mass extinction around 250 million years ago. The formation of Pangea led to a few things, one being a very high continent, deep ocean type of world. In other words, when all of the continents smashed together, the elevation was risen such that sea level fell, or rather than sea level falling, it was more of continents rising and ocean margins migrating seaward. And this is called regression. And this regression of seas off of continents eliminated shallow sea environments that were previously transgressed onto continental land masses. And this elimination of these shallow marine environments and ecosystems, because of the moving of the ocean margins, led to a mass elimination of the life that inhabited them. I should note too, this was also a factor during the Ordovician mass extinction that we just talked about due to Gondwana and the glaciation. When obviously Gondwana became covered in ice takes up water and sea level falls. So this regression cause of a mass extinction was also one of the factors that caused the Ordovician mass extinction. And like with that event, the regression of seas caused by Pangea was only one factor that contributed to this mass extinction. Pangea also caused an increase in dryness, aridity, and desertification, essentially the conversion of land that isn't a desert into desertified land, dried up desert land. And this led to immense dune fields at the time across Pangea's continent, as well as evaporite basins. Evaporite basins, if you don't know, are just basins that used to have water, like lakes and such, that dried up, and when they dry up, they form evaporite minerals, which are just salts that crystallize because all the water gets evaporated as fresh water. Salts don't evaporate upward. So the water leaves and the salts precipitate out things like NaCl, table salt, which we call halite, gypsum, sylvite, calcium carbonate. All of these are evaporite minerals that form as water evaporates, and they become saturated into solution until they precipitate out or crystallize. And these evaporite basins, because they form evaporite minerals, are very easy to see in the rock record, which is one of the things or indicators that we have for the dryness that Pangea caused. It caused this dryness because, as a supercontinent would, it leads to a lot of land away from ocean margins, which leads to a lot of dry climate land. This further increased habitat change and loss for a lot of organisms and terrestrial animals at the time, which led to more extinctions, and it decreased the carbon burial rates that were occurring previously in the period before the Permian, the Carboniferous, in the global swampy environments that were going on at that time. If you don't know, the Carboniferous period is known for its swampy terrestrial ecosystems that led to massive coal deposition, which is why we call it the Carboniferous. And these swamps dried up in the Permian due to the formation of Pangea, and this increased CO2 in the atmosphere and warming because it stopped all of that carbon sequestration going on. And these changes, the regression of seas and the desertification on land, along with major volcanism at the time of the Permian mass extinction, which contributed to rapid global warming, all led to the extinction of nearly 96% of species on Earth, which is why we say this is the largest mass extinction of the Phanerozoic eon. But it wasn't just the formation of Pangea that was devastating to life. The breakup of Pangea also caused major devastation in the very next mass extinction event, the Triassic mass extinction, around 200 million years ago. As Pangea began to break up with rifting and major volcanism in what is now where the mid-Atlantic ridge is. This led to ocean anoxia, or oxygen depletion in the ocean water column, ocean acidification, and global warming, all due to the massive amounts of carbon dioxide released as the major rifting and volcanism occurred at the mid-Atlantic, or the CAMP, the Central Atlantic Magmatic Province. But in the long term, the breakup of Pangea led to major speciation and diversification of life. This is because from about 200 million years ago to 66 million years ago, so right when Pangea broke up 200 million years ago, coinciding with the Triassic mass extinction, all the way until 66 million years ago when the asteroid hit and the dinosaurs died, Pangea was slowly breaking up and the continents were moving away from each other, and this initial breakup helped dinosaurs diversify, again, due to the mechanism we talked about earlier, population isolation, and therefore speciation. So as populations of species became separated onto different continental landmasses, and then they spent sufficient time away from each other to evolve into sufficiently different things, this led to speciation and therefore diversification of life on Earth. Specifically in this time frame, dinosaur life. However, after the non-avian dinosaurs went extinct 66 million years ago, mammals, which were around previously but not basically just rodent-like throughout the dinosaur era, they were allowed then to become big and more diverse and all of this stuff because dinosaurs, large non-avian dinosaurs, were now extinct, leading to more open niches and ecological roles that mammals could play. But also, mammals also diversified due to continuing separation of continental land masses. We can see that even by the time dinosaurs went extinct 66 million years ago, Pangea had, yes, broken up, but things were still not to the configuration that they are today in terms of continental configuration. Now, continents are even more separated, and there's more land masses that have separated since 66 million years ago in the period, or, well, the era, the Cenozoic era, in which mammals have been the main thing diversifying and dominating ecosystems. This is actually why we call the Mesozoic era from 250 to 66 million years ago the age of dinosaurs, and the Cenozoic era from 66 million years ago to today the age of mammals. And finally, we have number 6, which I didn't mention before, but it's the next supercontinent. Will there be a future supercontinent? Well, there's actually a few different potential configurations that have been proposed for a supercontinent that might form around 250 million years from now. And based on how this next supercontinent might affect climate, based on some models that have been done, it's thought that this supercontinent might cause the extinction of mammals. But I am going to be talking about that in a future video, so keep an eye out for that. So with that, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If the future supercontinent / extinction video is out by now, I will put it up here on the screen. If it's members only right now, don't worry, it'll come out for everybody soon. If that one's not out yet, I'll put a different video up on the screen. Go check whatever that is out. And with that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.